Preparing to live stream the webinar, Zoom to YouTube. Webinar is now streaming live on YouTube. Wow, this is amazing. It's redirecting here. Redirecting to YouTube. It's still on kind of a redirecting page here.
I have a notification it's live on YouTube on my end.
Yeah, that's what it says. And but here it just says redirecting to YouTube, but it doesn't give your browser settings do not allow cross-tracking. Click on this page to allow add rail, accept and close. Okay. Oh, I see. Here is the YouTube. Let me do this. I'm waiting for this to come on, and we have one of those Mac round kaleidoscopal multicolored.
Buffering.
Oh boy. Okay, here we are. Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambermont Weber, and this broadcast, this webinar is going out live on Exopolitics TV on YouTube, which has about almost 49,000 plus subscribers. On Exopolitics TV. And it has 10 million plus views. So this is a first experiment with this. 9,000 plus. And I'm trying to see how I can stop the double stuff. So here we are in a most interesting webinar with a member of the U.S. Mars exploration team, Karen Christine Patrick. Welcome, Karen.
Hello.
And Karen Christine Patrick is organizing the Mars Anomaly Research Society's 7th annual conference, which is in Silver City, New Mexico, which you can find out more about at MarsAnomalyConference.com. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And Karen Christine's background is that she has been many things, from an experiencer, because suddenly in this panoply of windows that have opened up in this new experiment over here, I cannot locate the page with the bio. So Karen Christine, over to you. Could you please give us some of your extraordinary bio? how you ended up to be on the US Mars exploration team with such luminaries as Andrew D. Basiago and many others. We're not going to mention one disgraceful person who we know is Barack Obama, Satoru Sobarka, who I believe is guilty of moral turpitude. I just have to say that as a war crimes judge. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
Calling it out. Calling it out.
He, along with another guy who was in my Yale's class, but flunked out as a sophomore, named Richard B. Cheney, who was reportedly head of the Mars Colony Corporation, I believe are individuals who went, in Cheney's words, over to the dark side and have engaged in acts of moral turpitude and war crimes regarding Mars. We are now holding a series of webinars with the members of the US Mars team who are survivors, who are individuals of light. That is, I believe they're whistleblowers. I believe they're also light workers and divine oriented souls, because that's what the universe is about. It's about soul development. And Karen Christine Patrick is here to introduce herself and to tell you and share with you the most extraordinary story. And I urge all of you to get to Silver City, New Mexico, September 7th to 9th. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, 2018. Tremendous speakers. Even I,
Oh, yeah.
Alfred Lammermont Weber, who used to dance. I used to dance as a 6 or 7 year old in the dining room of my grandmother's house in Havana, Cuba, to the latest cha-cha-cha, which was "Los marcianos llegaron ya y llegaron bailando cha-cha-cha." That means Martians have landed, and they landed cha-cha-cha. And I used to dance to that, and I was only 5 or 6 years old. And that's where I first grokked onto the fact that the Martians have landed. So, and that we have landed with the Martians. And that was back in, I was born in 42. I'm a pre-boomer.
Yeah.
So there you go. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to hand the talking stick over to Mars team member, Mars exploration team member, Karen Christine Patrick. Thank you so much, Karen. Take it away and enlighten us. Thank you.
I love your mention of exopolitical music. You could do an entire show just on all the musicians who've had experiences, as well as the music that they wrote inspired by that. That'd be a fun show. Musical interludes. Yeah, my name is Karen Christine Patrick. I was born in California, Central California, in 1961. I have had a lot of experiences, both just unusual experience as a human being, as well as a person who's had exopolitical or esoteric or, contact experiences. And it took me quite a while to sort it all out. And I still am, as a matter of fact, as so many are. And I want to mention kind of a recent experience. I got to go to Contact in the Desert this year, helping astronaut, consultant pilot Ken Johnston. I've been his editor and helping him to get his books out about his experience, which was an education all by itself about the space program, the overt space program. And that would be probably where I would start. But I want to say that when I was there, I thought I'd go see all the speakers that were speaking, mostly what I call non-experiencer researchers, doing case studies. Instead, I spent almost my whole time talking to experiencers, including several people who were in the secret space program. And it's like, man, that was worth the trip by itself. I missed the big show, but I got to get validation and education, and felt really honored to hear these stories when these people congregate at conferences telling each other what they're going through, what they've been through. And as you know, so many of them are targeted individuals, and that's a whole topic by itself. And I would say that that was my experience as well. So I was born in Richmond, California, Central California. And I started having, well, my parents, my parents were in an organization called the John Birch Society. You know, it's the extreme right wing organization, but it was an informational organization. And they were kind of interested in conspiracies, communist conspiracy. So later was denigrated as conspiracy theory, as a way to denigrate them and say there's nothing to see there, folks. So quite young, my parents were having meetings in their home and bringing in a really interesting group of people who were in three-letter agencies, people who had gone through regime changes in Cuba, in Hungary, in China, fighting in the war, in the Korean War. I lost one of my grandfathers in the Korean War. And so from a very early age, I got impressed with the fact that this planet didn't feel very safe. And my parents were also very religious. So I, adopted that religious mindset. And at the age of 5 years old, I made a commitment to higher power, God as I understood it, to say, I want to be a light worker. I want to be on this no matter what happens. And at the same time this was going on, my church was talking about the Fox's Book of Martyrs. So I was hearing about people giving the ultimate for what they believed in. And so at 5 years old, I think that's an important stage for me to say, I want to be on the right side of this thing. It's a good thing I did that, because I had an incredible challenge that happened to me at the age of 7 when I went into public school. Oh, most people don't know this. I like to say offhand, we have an overt and covert government. We have overt and covert science. We have overt and covert operations of all kinds. And that's the confusion. We have an overt and covert space program. And that's the confusion that we've got. That's the front. And so when, for instance, I talk to people and I say, talk about maybe the jump room technology that took us to Mars, they say, oh, that's not possible. Well, not in the science that we're taught. I call it PBS science. It's the overt teachings, but there's a covert side to this thing. So at the age of 7, I went to school. I was tested into the gifted and talented program. At the time, there was a statewide program called Project Talent. It's overtly a program to find, kids that got some, good smarts going for them, to help them track towards college and a career in the sciences and whatnot, and military as well. But the covert thing about Project Talent is it also was testing for psychic ability, just to put it bluntly. And I like to tell this one story because I'm finding more and more people who have had this test. And there's this test with some cards, and they're called Zener cards, Zener. You can find them online. There's even an app for that, where you could test yourself with Zener cards. And it was kind of a test for ESP ability. It was cards with archetypal imagery, a square, a circle, a triangle, wavy lines, and a plus sign or a red cross. And I was brought as I'm going through the testing process, I was brought to the principal's office and the vice principal's office at my school. And I was a little nervous about that because I was kind of a nerdy, goody two-shoes little kid. And I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong, right? When I got into the office, there was a man sitting there who I pretty much instantly knew was not a school official of any kind. He was not connected to the school. And he was kind of a professor, frumpy tweed suit, looking over his spectacles at me like I was a bug kind of guy. And he gave me a full psychological profile test at the age of 7. And one of the things that I know now that was, again, this was against my parents' knowledge. and the permission. You have to have a permission for that kind of test. So we're talking the ink blot tests and some aptitude tests and dexterity tests and whatnot. And then he proceeded to test me with these Zinner cards, and he made it like it was a game, like a guessing game. So he showed me, there was a little mat in front of me. He showed me what the cards were, the first few, and said, try to guess it. And then he went through the whole deck of cards. And after that, he didn't show me the results, but he would say, what card is this? And I'd point to what was ever on the mat, and he'd make a mark, like a tally mark. And that was, I tell that story as often as I can because I think it jogs the memory of people who had that test. And so I think it was quite common that was like one in a screening test for continued testing. There was other things as well, but the main thing that I want to get across, because this is going to be my talk at the Mars Anomaly Research Society conference, is called the Psychic Sentinels. And it has to do with the idea that we had definitely the remote viewing program, and probably 5 minutes after we had that, we needed to have some kind of resistance to that. We had to have people who could tell when a remote viewer was psychically poking around in, our strategic assets. And so I did not really get into I don't think I screened into the remote viewing program, because as you can see, I have big glasses. I had Coke bottle glasses. I was blind as legally blind with very, very thick glasses. At the time, I was not a remote viewer, but I was a remote knower. I was clairaudient, and I just would know stuff. And I tried to explain it. The term I got later from a mentor was the nosive, Gnosive, nosive. And so it's like that MTV program, I think it was MTV, pop-up videos. If I was around a situation or holding an object or having a conversation, extra information about whatever was going on would be popping into my head. And I didn't have any descriptions of what the heck that was until many years later. But they obviously were interested in me. So I was put into the class, and I now know in retrospect that the class was still a continuation of testing. And I got uncomfortable. I got uncomfortable because we're not doing the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. We were doing all this other stuff. We were learning self-hypnosis. We were being asked very strange questions. And finally, I told my parents what was going on, and they didn't even know I was in that class. And so there was a big brouhaha, which the school and my parents were fighting. And I consider this a divine intervention that I was pulled out of the school, because I now know that was creating, they were looking for psychic and talented children like Andrew Basiago and many others for secret programs. They try to catch kids when they're young before they get talked out of the fact that they're psychic or telekinetic or all those other things. And so there's the Cold War era. The Russians are already ahead of the United States in parapsychology development, because we all got, our Nazi paperclip. The Russians did, the United States did, but the Russians, not being quite as puritanical as the United States, right away used the Nazi scientists who were studying parapsychology and advanced their program, and the United States was playing catch up. So that was kind of what was going on. After that, during that process, I shut up. I realized that whatever I was saying was upsetting or getting the grown-ups real excited about what I was saying, and it was disturbing to me. So I just clammed up. I didn't say anything, but I still had that downloading, as we call it now, going on. And so then there was a couple other times when I was intervened with, and that's a long story, but I think one possibility that has made a lot of sense to me is that there was what comes up time and time again in the secret space program is something called 20 and back, where people are put into secret programs and utilized for their psychic abilities or super soldier abilities or what have you, sometimes Earthside, sometimes going to Mars. Then they're age regressed and coming back to a normie, kind of lifestyle. So that explains another phenomenon that I have, is a lot of extra memories and dreams and visions of things that I still, like, I couldn't I have two sets or more of memories, which is very confusing to me because that's what the downloading began to feel like. And most of what I was remembering had to do with working with computers, because I did go into the computer field and work for 20 years in the computer field in development, software development. However, the other thing that was happening to me was this targeted individual situation where I had interventions in my life keeping me from, you know, going back into being very deeply in computer science and continuing that as a career. So this is what I'll be talking about at the conference. But the conference theme is called Listening to Mars, and that comes from what Bret Colin Sheppard, my partner, and Anomalous will be talking about, because he's going to be talking about the case in 1924 when several scientists, one of whom went on to develop the television, utilized the radio telescope invented by Nikola Tesla and pointed it to Mars at Mars apogee, which I believe is it's perigee or apogee, one of the two, closest to us as it is right now. And they actually communicated with someone on Mars, teaching them Morse code back and forth. And a small, I know you're from Yale, so I want to tell you, Yale Library released a very small snippet of that interaction. It looks like a seismograph type of tape. And the researchers kept saying they were seeing faces and other things in, they were like rubbing their eyes. Well, I don't understand why we're seeing repetition of faces. And so Bret Colin Sheppard's brilliant. So he was able to do two things. One, he was able to, because he's an artist, see the face and actually sketch it out. So if you go onto our website and you see that face, that's from that snippet of tape sketched out in a 3D format, 2D format by Bret Colin Sheppard and colorized, as well as he reverse engineered it into sound. And there are sets of beeps on that short snippet of tape, which is apparently 15 feet long at least, in the Yale Library, which has not been released. And there's a single dot or beep, and there's double beep. And you have to realize in 1924, we didn't have things that beeped, okay? So it was, in Morse code, it was the letter M, and it was the letter E, which spells out me. So somebody was communicating with us, and then recently I found this book by, a lot of times, paranormal types of things, ufological, exopolitical things end up in fiction. I found a book by Edgar Rice Burroughs that has a fictional account of first contact with Mars, which is it was in the papers at the time, it was discussed, and apparently made it into the consciousness so much that somebody made a cha-cha song out of it, right? So this is the kinds of things that we'll be having at our conference, as well as secret space program, other 20 and back experiencers. We have discussions about contactees of all various kinds, even going back to the 1600s. So we're pulling together, discussions of, people's experiences. I try very much to make this conference not so much of a non-experiencer researcher event. I wanted people who had a story to tell from their own life. So I hope that's a good introduction to all of this.
Yes. Who are some of the other people that will be speaking there?
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
And could you give an idea, because some people I see from are really tuning in to the Mars program for the first time. They don't even know that the US and Russia, their reports have had programs on Mars since 1964 even.
Right.
So yeah, so could you just begin to bring these people into the reality that, hey, we're in a solar system where our nearest planetary neighbor, Mars, is populated by Homo Martis Terris. They're people like us, and go for it. Sure.
Going back to that theme of overt and covert, is that this was, of course, covert program. I hope you talk a little bit later about Alternative 3, because that's an important link in the chain of knowledge of how we came to make it an urgent thing to go to Mars. Brett and I work with the Lunar Anomaly Research Society, so there's also a presence on the moon. But again, this was a covert program. They got to realize we haven't been out of near Earth orbit since Apollo 17. So what have we been doing? And then when I talked to Ken Johnston, who we had him on the list as a speaker, but unfortunately he won't be able to be there. But he says that the Apollo program was tracking to, or NASA was tracking to go to Mars in the 1970s. They were, trying to do that in the Overt program, and it was stopped. And we sent, devices instead of people. But I think that's all a front. I feel bad for people who've been scientists and engineers in that program that they have not been told. But this is based on our military, which is a need-to-know basis and compartmentalized. So that's part of the reason why it's coming out in fits and starts now. But basically, we have Louis Michael Reinhardt is the one who's been organizing. He was part of the Farsight Institute, remote viewing, and so he knows a lot about remote viewing that was done to try to visualize what was on Mars. So he's kind of also been one of the organizers of this particular conference. And then we have Carla Friedrich, who is, it's her fault, me and Brett are in Silver City. She kept saying we'd really like it here. We actually thought we were living on Mars. We were in central New Mexico on the Mesa, and I'd look out my window and go, I'm on Mars. I felt like it, but we're in a really nice area, Silver City, in the southwest corner of New Mexico, which is forested and very nice. But she's going to be talking about the experiencer, excuse me, I'll get it, Swedenborg, Emanuel Swedenborg was an experiencer and was contacted by beings from the other planets and wrote a book about it and was considered kind of crazy by other people. But as we have more and more experiencers telling their story, his story is very, very compelling. We have, trying to think of everybody. It's like Andrew Basiago, of course, and it's his fault we're all doing this. And yourself, Alfred, forming the Mars Anomaly Research Society, which was basically where people were looking at some of what the activities were looking at space agency photographs and finding things that, according to the official narrative, shouldn't be there. Creatures, statues. It looks like something that's been blown up. So there's some kind of traumatic history because there's torn up machinery. There's twisted wires and pipes. It just looks like that one day Mars had a really bad day, and the Mars anomaly. So there's several anomaly groups, but the Mars anomaly was focused on that. And then coming into it now is people giving testimony to the fact that there's an ancient story about Mars inhabitation. We're going to have Dr. Sasha and Janet Lesson, whom I am do radio with, and they followed up with Zechariah Sitchin, and there's a whole bunch of the ancient Sumerian writings pertaining to activity on Mars. We're going to have Tony Rodriguez, who's a 20 and back experiencer in the Super Soldier program of Mars. Oh, gotta think of everybody. That's at the top of my head right now. I don't have the list in front of me, but this is the kind of flavor of the things that we're looking at. And more, as we all kind of jog the memory of each other, more information is coming out. Oh, I have some lightning outside my door. That's about got a little. It's the monsoon season in New Mexico, so you might hear some lightning. The thing about the memory issue is this. One of my mentors in this, I've said this term. His name is A.R. Borden. I'm with a group of researchers who worked with A.R. Borden, who ostensibly worked in the 3-letter agency programs and was, went rogue and was trying to tell people what was going on. And he used the term blank slate technology. So it's basically etch-a-sketching your mind in a sense. So you have experiences, but they have the ability to suppress those enough to where, you don't remember them, or they're just dreams. But the kinds of dreams that I have are repetitive. They're like a tape recorder of a memory. They feel like a memory. Sometimes those are now become, for me, more vivid than my own memories growing up. They're very vivid because some of the things that happened were very adventurous, dark, and scary. But this is a phenomenon that people report when they have contact with ETs or interdimensionals. My friend John Polk said he calls it alien anesthesia, where you don't remember quite everything. And it could also partially be a natural function of trauma as well. So this is kind of the thing that has happened. And then the other thing that's happened is that as we all share our testimony and our experiences, and this is why it's so important to listen to experiencers, because we trigger each other and we begin to remember more. And it's beginning to map into a phenomenon where we're looking at clandestine programs that were extensive, used a lot of personnel, are ongoing, and it's time that we know about it. And our clandestine government, as some people
Hello, are you still there? Hello?
want to go, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Your image was frozen for a moment.
Oh,
yeah.
So was yours.
Yeah, please continue. I think that the usual archonic to human suppression forces that have kept Mars and Earth apart since 9500 BC, the last time that Earth and Mars really were together in interplanetary society, are now activating such that making it difficult for people to hear the in real time story from members of the US Mars exploration team. Over to you.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Both Bret and myself are targeting goals, and Bret actually finally had to go off of social media platforms because it's just been very distracting, frustrating, demoralizing what we've been through. I've been in radio for 6 years in this genre and had tremendous interruption. When I get to the juicy stuff, right? It's when all kinds of head breaks loose. But I think persistent intention is real important. So just keep going, keep trying. I'm a contactee. I asked my guides, what do I do? They said, keep going. So that's the thing, is that it's time, in my opinion, that we know. And the reason why I say the average, let's say, American person that needs to know this is the Pentagon has said that they lost $21 trillion the day before 9/11. And it came back out again, the trillion with AT, right? As well as Catherine Austin Fitts talking about the enormous amount of money that went into housing and urban development in the United States and disappeared as well. So something is going on financially. Our funds are being drained away for something. And the more that I'm in this topic, the more I'm, all roads lead to a secret space program, possibly a breakaway civilization concept. And, it's completely feasible to study how what's going on right now is studying the psyop. That's what's interesting to me, is how do people not see this? How do they not know this? How do they continue to believe whatever they're told? How come they continue to fight with each other in an either or kind of way? To me, is what I'm doing now. This is so, and to begin to demand straight up information from our leaders about what's going on.
Right, right. You know, I was wondering now, just looking at the outlines of the uh, webinar, when you say Karen Patrick will be describing the Psychic Sentinel program as part of clandestine operations, such as the teleportation or the Mars jump room program. And then 3 eyewitnesses have confirmed a multiple of Karen Christine Patrick.
Yeah.
Now, I read through that paragraph, and of course, I've been following anomalies along with yourself for a while now, and it's even then it's hard to follow. So could you sort of walk us through that, Karen? Thank you.
Boy, it's a deep subject, but basically what happened to me is this continuing unfoldment of multiple. So the flip side of that is I've had about a dozen people tell me they've seen me before, they met me, I was a lab coat, glasses, and this I would identify as either program kids, so people who were brought into the programs and utilized. But then the whole thing kicked up a notch, and I said, okay, that's fine. It was yeah, interesting. But I'm the kind of person when I hear new information, I feel like I have kind of like a table in front of me, like a puzzle. So I put that puzzle piece over and I say, okay, that's interesting, but I don't know how it fits together. A set of experiences happened that put it into sharp focus for me. The first thing that happened was when I was living up on the Mesa in south of Albuquerque. I was went with my family to the laundromat of all places, and while I was there, a woman approximately 15 years older than me was sort of looking like she was doing her laundry, but she kind of was. It was a she was kind of lingering there. And the situation with our family was Bret and I were very heavily involved in research, so we typically didn't go anywhere that public. We had to go to the store, get what we need, and then go back up at our house and work. So we weren't typically anywhere public, but the laundromat was one place we were stuck for 2 hours doing laundry. And as I talked with this woman, Bret and his daughter Cheyenne were watching and realizing, now we're very much into the study of timelines, and it's not an unfamiliar concept, but they realized I was talking to myself or somebody who looked a lot like me, only 15 years older. Now, I got to tell you, the mat was pretty boring. I read all the pamphlets that were there. There was a little dog-eared book of a man from La Mancha. I would just read a newspaper. If I had a scintillating conversation with anyone, I would have remembered it. I did not remember it. Bret told me I talked about this woman for 3 days incessantly, as I do. I like to obsess, and because it was an interesting conversation. And then I stopped on a dime. I do not remember the majority of this encounter. Here's what I remember: zippy vest, fleece, and I offered it to her, and she offered to trade me her hat, which, oh my gosh, I wish I had that hat. And I said no, because I'm a caregiver. I want people to be comfortable. She was older than me, so I was worried. So I said, well, you keep your hat, you stay warm. Here's my vest. Now, after this encounter, I can't find my vest. I can't remember where it was at all. I don't remember giving it to this woman at all. Cheyenne remembers it and explained it to me. So I remember her tipping her head forward, taking off the hat, and I saw the top of her head, which is the same color hair as me, just a little more gray. And then I remember a few more just brief things, but mostly I don't remember anything. I'm still working on that memory. Now, fast forward, that was a couple of years ago. So fast forward to Christmas of last year here in Silver City, we had a visit. We had a visit from a woman. She was 15 years older than me. 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 and it was Andrew Basiago, actually, just being here in his earlier years, and he's a time-traveling person and knows about timelines and everything. And he kind of looks at me. We've always had the feeling we know each other. We're the same age. We were both in programs in California, roughly the same time. But he goes, I remember seeing you. And what he said was, he was dealing with a woman in the Mars jump room program named Dr. Karen Rose, was her name. And she was approximately 50. And her job was liaison between the database on all the jump room participants, as well as the psychic team that was also involved. Describing what was happening, she was interviewing him, and she was asking him a lot of strange questions. She kept asking, what's your favorite color? Do you prefer licorice or chocolate? Those very odd questions. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew exactly what was going on. Not only did I know exactly what was going on, but I realized I could do her job now. What she was doing, she was building a profile of these not arbitrary, but sensory questions. And the idea was to get the energy signature of somebody. I have that ability. I think the most shocking thing for me was when my father passed away, and I literally did not realize to the extent that I pick up the energy signature of people. I was a family caregiver for years. If they couldn't talk, I could tell what they wanted. I have a lot of empathic ability. So what she was doing was getting questions that she could put in the database, give to one of the psychics, which I believe were tracking these people that were in these weird exotic programs. The jump room program is an interdimensional system transporting people from Earth to Mars and back again. We had somehow transcended the need for rockets in that slow process, and we had teleportation, time travel, and a jump room program between probably the moon and Earth and Mars, very active by the time Andrew participates in it. And they needed people to, if you're going to transport somebody through time and space, you probably had to have somebody who could find them using their energy signatures. Now, the funny thing was what I knew if I was in a program that I had quit and discussed over the treatment of people. I had that sense. He confirmed to me that Dr. Rose quit very shortly after that set of interviews Andrew had, and that she said, and I quote, these people, you don't understand, these people who are running this program are Nazis. Well, Andrew took it to be, like a pejorative. They're just a bunch of Nazis. They're just mean or something. I believe now, and I think he believes now, that was literally true. So again, going back to the incursion of Nazi engineers and people involved in parapsychological studies in our government who were brought to California. I knew of one enclave was in China Lake, California. I've got some involvement with that. And so this is what I think was going on. So that kind of puts me, maybe I should write a book, me, myself, and time, because it's an unusual situation. And I do believe that there is indication that there is a cloning program in the secret space program. I don't believe that this is what is involved. I think this is a time twin effect. But one of the things that the Nazis studied back, Dr. Mengele is infamous for twin the we have a whole thing regarding cloning, which I don't doubt is true. What I feel, however, because I'm going to briefly mention this because I don't even have time to go into it, but the Mandela effect, where somebody remembers something like there were 6 people in the car when Kennedy was shot now, but I remember there were 4 in all the movies that I ever saw. So whatever Mandela effect is presently, whatever version of that history is true now, I'm on the wrong side of it every time. I remember a different timeline, and I think that they have the ability to also go into the infinite timelines that are parallel to our own and pull people through. And I've got good reasons to believe that that is the case for myself. Which is odd, which is an odd story. I currently can't hear you, by the way. Sorry about that.
Yeah. What is your feeling now about the state of Mars disclosure by the Mars exploration team whistleblowers? We've been at this now, I think we're in 2018, started in earnest around the turn of the century. So that's at least 20 years, various members, and then members coming in and out. Some of the members have suffered greatly, including loss of life.
Yes.
Because of their public declarations. Do you think that there is more knowledge now than there was 10 years ago? Do you think that those forces from the archons on down to certain extraterrestrial forces, certain industrial forces, that negative industrial forces that control Mars, certain alliances of positive extraterrestrials, certain political factions here, geopolitical factions here on Earth that are against the solar system getting back together, humans in the solar system getting back together in self-sovereignty? What is your estimate of the ebb and flow of Mars disclosure as a result of the Mars exploration team whistleblowers' activities over these last 20 odd years? I mean, it seems to go back and forth. I'd love to hear your kind of inside story on that.
I almost use those exact words in my mind, ebb and flow, because it seems to be a vacillation between a lot of different, it's a very complex topic, but generally speaking, with a faction that wants us to do business as usual, to maintain what I call the consensus reality show. And I say that because it's now very much media based, and to control the narrative and to not have any of this come out. At the same time, I strongly believe, back when my family was learning about the various conspiracies and the intent to harm humanity in a big way, I literally felt like I wasn't going to even grow up. And that was a pretty fair estimation at the time, with the turbulent times of the 1960s, with the threats for my family. My family eventually had to relocate from California to Oregon because of their activities, and because of what happened to me and also my brother as well. There were some other issues, but so I, being a targeted individual, and being friends with people who've suffered greatly, so there's times when it's on, man. You can't do anything. You just have to duck and cover. There's times when it seems like we can at least get the information out to people who are taking an interest. And this is probably one of the more difficult aspects of what we're doing, is we kind of want to shout it from the rooftops, and do something drastic to try to give attention to this. However, it seems to be there's a more subtle game going on, because the amount of information that's come out has been more beneficial to other experiencers and other people paying attention than it is, of course, mainstream. So one thing that's been the most positive development of all is that most of us were in isolation from each other for a very long time, within our families, within our communities. My family was very religious, so that was not something I could talk about. Making contact with other entities would have been considered, very, very negative. So within family structures, within religion, political, of course, on the job, you certainly don't want to talk about this at work, or they're going to hand you some tinfoil to make a hat with, right? The ridicule factor is very high. And I believe the ridicule factor is part of the psyop, part of the mass hypnosis going on. So at least now, though, because of social media, because of some of the blank slate stuff wearing off of collectively of people. I think that is a collective energy because of our guides and those who want to help us, which I really truly believe. And it could be anywhere from celestial beings all the way to other races who are helper races. Because, you know, when we in America has been great for seeing a catastrophe go on in the world, we reach out, we go help, we send help. I believe that's happening to the earth from galactic governance and other species who do want our well-being. And I think that's why it stays in sort of this, you know, kind of in a ebb and flow kind of way, because we have the, what I call Thanatos culture. So Thanatos means death. We have a death cult running the world right now who have absolutely no problem with the idea that billions of us just expire. And I don't know what that's archonic influence, is super negative, and it's kind of I don't get it. I just don't get it. Whereas we also have forces that I think are helping us, but it really is up to us. And sometime, Alfred, you and I need to talk about the basic income, because that's a whole topic I'm involved in politically, because to me it's the basic agreement.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get to. We need to talk about what?
Basic income. I'm an advocate for the basic income. And
well, you know,
right.
here in Canada and in many other countries, they are experimenting with that. And if you go to positivefuture.info, that's part of the platform that we have put forward in our platform to become Earth's representative to the Regional Galactic Governance Council, you know, because that's not going to happen until Earth gets its act together. And certainly having what the United States masquerading, I mean, it really is terrible that the Luciferians infiltrated the American Revolution back in 1776, which they did through Skull and Bones out of Yale, my alma mater, and made it a nation that is battling between Lucifer and God for its very existence. And the Lucifer side of it, they don't care about their people. They seem to want to make it so that their souls can be picked off by any negative entity. And that it's Americans spend more time trying to keep body and soul together than any, not only advanced nation, but any other nation that I've come across at the present moment. Over to you.
To me, I've studied the basic income for a number of years and came to this conclusion. I think that the idea of a spiritual decision is before us. And the idea is that we decide, we agree that everyone deserves to be taken care of no matter what. And if we cannot make that decision collectively, I don't believe that we should continue, because the problem with having that mindset is that leads to everything negative that happens in terms of discounting the value of people and respecting their sovereignty, and from allowing people to just exist unmolested. I mean, there's so many things connected to it. And then on top of that, being how I was in the technology field for 20 years and watching all that, the internet, the early days of the internet, and now knowing an interesting repository, untapped repository of information is experiencers. We have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people with amazing information to share who are currently being kicked. I call it microaggression. They don't post, so they get kicked off of the platform. Microaggression by the corporate social media. And we literally have a wealth of knowledge available about people who know how to activate on free energy, people who know healing modalities, people who know, so many things waiting for us to make that decision. We ourselves are capable of bringing ourselves into more advanced culture, but we have to have a fundamental spiritual agreement.
I agree. I agree. And many other countries had that conversation in past decades. And
Yes.
it was in my judgment, it was in the post-World War II when you had the so-called Rockefeller Commission, the Rockefellers being the North America, the sort of the New World contractors for the Rothschilds, who are the implementers of the Synagogue of Satan, Anunnaki reptilian hybrids, their kind of agenda for the planet. And the Rockefellers, through their agent, Henry Kissinger, who I think was chosen because his name was Henry Alfred Kissinger. There's kind of this drama going on. I mean, it's weird how they take TIs and then they make memes out of them. Kissinger went out and they devised, the United States of America is going to be the third city state. This is after the Act of 1871, when the Vatican and the City of London got together. They had the District of Columbia formed so that could become the third city state. So it would be the military arm of the third city state of the Vatican, UK, USA. I guess you would call it Vaticusa. Vaticusa. It sounds like some kind of vampire, right?
Thus spake Zarathustra.
Yeah, it's like Mystery Babylon. A different name for Mystery Babylon would be Vaticusa. Vatican, City of London, and the United States of America Corporation, all in caps. And that's a corporation. It has nothing to do with the U.S. Constitution of 1787. I should know, on various sides of my family, I have Native American, but also the John Alden on the famous, I made barrels and stuff. My grandfather did a genealogy and directly related to coming over at that time, as well as Native American. So that we have to go back and take back America from the Luciferians and the Satanists and come back to the rest of the world. I hate to tell you, but the rest of the world has universal health care and is working toward that and has these attitudes. It's the United States where they become a vassal of Israel and the Synagogue of Satan and the Jesuits, that all they've done through the misapplication of the Project Pegasus and the time travel pre-identified precedents is implement a draconian, literally from Draco reptilian and Anunnaki reptilian world empire at creating war, disease, crime, and poverty in the world. But most of the world has gotten way beyond that. And it's just the American people through what they call the Rockefeller Commission after World War II, where they said, this is the American empire. We're the land of the free and the brave, and we just go into countries and we break them. That's it. That's what we do. And everybody signed on to that because they got the job at the local ammunition factory or, whatever. And they had satanic Luciferian pedophiles doing ritual child sacrifice in the White House to stay in power. I mean, this is an abomination. It's not a nation. And George W. Bush, I heard George H.W. Bush was the one that had the negative side of the Mars project invade the United States through the jump room in reverse. So you had the Rockefeller Rothschild run slave camps on Mars. People can go to exopolitics.com and you can see that. We did that with a number of other documented with a number of other scholars, industrial slave sites on Mars where the figure has been, 60,000 plus, to much larger figures I've heard. Professionals were kidnapped from the UK, from the US and the first world and taken to Mars under false pretenses. Let's talk about that. Would you like to talk about that now?
Yeah, I can add some thoughts to that. I pretty much have identified my earliest experiences of all of this with the Rockefeller activities. My father worked for Standard Oil. I was brought to a facility that I now know was owned by them as a child for some of that testing I was talking about. I would say that if you count people who work without support or pay, people who are wage slaves, people, the aforementioned child worker trafficking, that's children and sex worker and worker trafficking that goes on, where again they're not supported. So my partner Bret was, his family was, his mother actually was involved in child trafficking that was and drug trafficking, probably CIA based, that went through Chicago, and he was a material witness in that case, which was the investigation was run by Ken Starr. Don't get me started, because I take him to be the cleanup man. I don't. They end up sort of investigating and arresting the minor characters while the big guys the bosses go free. So that is kind of the matrix situation going on. But as far back as you can think of human history, if you talk about the Anunnaki story being an intervention into, I think, an intelligent species that was already tribal and integrated with this environment here on Earth, was intervened with by another race who turned them into slaves. So I think Tellinger's correct, Michael Tellinger, when he has that book, Slave Species of God. I think that's a good model to consider. But they took an intelligent species to do that. So we are we have trouble with straight up slavery of, pick this rock up here and take it over there, because we also have spiritual intelligence in our species. We have natural intelligence from being involved in nature and connected to nature and connected to God's source. So you're basically taking something very intelligent, not a monkey man like it says in those scriptures. I don't believe that. Those writings. I believe that we are a template of humanity from possibly millions of years, and we've been dumbed down. I think we've not been uplifted, in my opinion. And I think, however, what I feel on the positive side is that all of our experiences as a species aggregates. My mentor, A.R. Borden, talked about the bio-kind, bio-mind, and you see that in action when you see the resonant harmonics of birds all flying together and they don't crash into each other, and fish all, swimming together and turning at the same time. That's our harmonic resonance. And I believe all of our experiences are collecting into this higher mind of the species. And I literally think the negatives are fighting against something way more intelligent than they are. And I think that that's what they've been trying to do with so many programs. The PSYOP of mainstream, consensus reality, all the way to the exotic stuff of, frequencies and cell towers and chemtrails and all. They're fighting against what I think, and I'm choosing to believe this, and this is important to me, is that growing up in kind of a negative, somebody's out to get you conspiracy environment, which I do believe we're on about real things, no doubt. I had to make a decision. I had to make a spiritual decision, thinking that I wasn't going to grow up. And we had the bomb, we had duck and cover, we had all this going on in my home, and the religion talking about persecution and death. If you're a good person, I made a decision to believe and to work towards a positive outcome. And the fact that I could do that is my, and other people make that choice. And the more they mess with us, the more we know about them and what they're doing. This is the upshot. All these targeted individuals are our best resource to find out what they've been doing and to know what's available. I'm telling you, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are knowledgeable to turn our planetary, the way we do things around in a day. There's replicator technology, there's free energy technology, which is negentropic. It means that when you activate it, it's against entropy, which is what, everything gets worse and worse, entropy. Negentropic devices are, everything gets better and better. And it's interesting to me that when people grow seeds that were found on the plants in crop circles, they've been doing this in China, they get a multiple increase in crops. So we've got friends in high places going, you need to realize what's available to you. But we do need to make this basic agreement that everybody deserves to be taken care of no matter what. And that agreement has got so much power to it, because if there's a will, there's a way. We will find a way to cure cancer, my daughter can't walk, she's disabled. That technology could come along to help her walk. I mean, everything's right there under the surface and a little bit above the surface. But right now, technology is being hampered by the fact that if we apply all this technology right now, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs unless we have a basic income to start, and I consider it a transitional technology, if you will, until we bring more and more technology to bear to where money is not needed to provide things. That's an old technology, and it's running to the end of its usefulness.
Yeah, I'm now going to the conference page here, marsanomalyconference.com, and these are, many of them are individuals that actually have been on Mars.
Yes.
And why don't I start reading off some of these names, and you can tell people, summarize for people who they are, and summarize some of what their testimony is as Mars explorers, or whatever other role that they have as to why they're there, so that people can get an idea of the mass of living witnesses now,
Yeah.
and testimony to the fact that, not only is Mars alive, but it's a living program, and that the last POTUS, Barack Obama Satoru Soybarka, Obama is the manufactured name. He took it falsely in a British Columbia court here in Tecumseh. And we have all of those documents for his war crimes trial, whenever that will be scheduled. However, let's start with, it starts with Andrew D. Basiago. Could you tell us a bit about him?
Yes, I met Andrew shortly after he was declared by Cliff High of halfpasthuman.com. And what Cliff did was he had an aggregate web bot that searched out the zeitgeist that the internet was kicking out, which actually served to be somewhat precognitive, sort of the AI of our day, right? So I heard about Andrew, and it's something really, when a piece of information hits me, I have an energy signature feeling about it. And something told me, pay attention to this story. As far as I know, Andrew D. Basiago is the only person by name that the webbot ever kicked out. And the information about him was he was a planetary whistleblower. So I began to read up everything I could find about him. And I was living in Washington State at the time, and found out that he was going to go speak in Rainier, Washington, which wasn't too far from where my mother lived. So I went out there and listened to what he had to say. And boy, I was off and running. There was so much about his story that was really, compelling for me. in the idea that he talked about Project Pegasus, which was time travel that was developed and he was a part of as a child participant in the 70s. And then the jump room program of Mars, which he participated when he was in his 20s. And so that was, what's interesting about Andrew is he wrote about life on Mars, a white paper with his photos and other evidence that this program existed. And he, as far as this sort of strange time anomaly issue, because we do have time travel, we have time operations going on. His father was involved in the clandestine programs and gave him a copy of his own paper to read when he was a young person. He was 10. And that was like, I don't know why it all seemed very plausible to me. I didn't even question it. It felt right to me. You yourself had that experience of your book, Exopolitics. Apparently somebody had read it and they were sitting in the front row when you were speaking long before you got involved in this. And my partner, Bret Sheppard, was shown when he was 15 years old and part of that FBI investigation of his mother. So he's found in time and space in Indiana. He was shown in his high school classroom his own work from the future, where he goes and looks at anomalies and finds embedded imagery in Mars and lunar images, which is part of his work and what he talks about. But that's, Andy's testimony. I talked to, we all need, some of us who were tipped off and activated in a sense by Andy, we need to write a book about Andrew, call it Our Dinner with Andrew, because he kind of stimulated the memories of a lot of people that jived with their experiences. And so it's kind of his fault. We're all in Silver City having a conference. I appreciate him as a colleague as well. He's very straightforward person. He knows how to lay out the case. I've now heard him in 21 hours of direct. I was like in the room when he was talking about things. And just like yourself, having the legal background lays out the case for all of this to be true, to then be validated by other people. So that's Andrew. Great guy. Andy.
Okay, I have some questions. Life and food sources on Mars.
Life and food sources. Well, obviously, I'm right now reading a fictional account of when the overt space program decides to go to Mars, which is discussed a lot by billionaires such as Elon Musk and Sir Richard Branson, etc. And I think we've got to listen to experiences of Mars to realize that actually is not as depicted in our fiction. Mars is inhabited. Apparently, it's a bit dangerous on the surface for various reasons. So the majority of humans like us live underground. When you access the jump room technology, you go from a facility somewhere on Earth, and you usually end up underground by all the testimony I've ever heard. So it has an atmosphere, although maybe a little thinner. I'm living at 6,500 feet up in the mountains in New Mexico, so I can relate. So you can get fatigued fairly easily up here. So that's the situation. And they've got the technology to do all kinds of things as far as food, possibly food replication, or even technology to maybe vertical growing. I don't know what all. The kinds of things that you see in fiction are likely true of how we would survive up there, except for one thing. In the movie The Martian, they were living on the surface. I don't think that's safe to do due to the predators and due to the storms that are there. I think underground living is probably quite comfortable.
Yeah. Now, Darcy, we have many questions, but Darcy and perhaps others, they say, ask about your dreams. What are your earliest memories of standout dreams? They're asking about your dreams, and I guess they're asking about your multi-dimensional dreams, your prophetic dreams, dreams having to do perhaps with your work with the Mars team, perhaps with interdimensional contact. I don't know.
My dreams have been precognitive, a lot of them. So I have dreams that pretty much I can have a dream sequence. It's usually quite a few dreams of the same thing. And they are kind of to me like breadcrumbs through my journey through life. And they tell me that I'm on the path and what to look at. So for instance, one dream that I had was I kept dreaming about New Mexico, and I kept dreaming about Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and I got to go there a couple of times. And I'm standing in this one spot when I visited there, and I just had, the biggest case of deja vu you could possibly have. And the dream sequence indicated that under the mesa that's in Chaco Canyon is an underground facility. So I believe that a genetic memory of many people is that, and also the stories, the Native American stories, is that the humanity was underground. I'm going to be talking about that in Rio Rancho in October, and that we emerged onto the surface. And in the dream sequence, we're learning how to live on the surface again after some cataclysm. Other dream sequences indicate what's going to happen to places that I've lived before. One, I grew up in an area, southern Oregon, that was primarily a timber community, and I literally had the same dream sequence over and over again of people starting to grow vineyards there. I mean, in a big, big way. And because of the California drought and fires, that is exactly what has happened. So that was a dream sequence. And then I've dreamed about the future, where I go back and I visit Seattle. And what's really fascinating with that dream sequence is that I'm staying in co-housing or sort of Airbnb on steroids. You don't rent in the same one place. You just go where you need to be. You put a key card in. You get to go into a tiny home or tiny apartment with shared communal areas on the outside. So our way we live changes significantly. I've definitely had dreams of being underground. Probably the most vivid of those dream sequences was at Mount Shasta, where there is a very comfortable underground facility with apartments that seem to have a balcony that overlooks like a caldera or inside lava area. And there's very, very high technology involved that I believe would be more the breakaway civilization than what we have now, but I definitely believe exists. It's pretty easy for me to extrapolate what we're going to have based on a 20-year career in IT. So, and then I have other dreams that are trying to explain the world situation. A few years ago, well, in 2010, I started doing automatic writing. And I have a stack of notebooks about this high, and I'm going to be teaching this technique to bring out more of this downloaded information I was getting. And it quickly became a dialogue between an entity group that I call the Joyous, or I call them All Guides, and myself. And the information I wrote down didn't make sense to me at the time, but absolutely have to do with present day. And it was very informative about the idea that it's been decided by the white hats, ET and otherwise human, that humanity needs to go through a transition from being scarcity minded now, which is our affliction, which is our addiction, to abundance thinking and using more technology and cooperating more with nature. We can't get too far away from nature, or we're not getting it right in terms of what we need and what's good for the planet.
Those are very, very wise words. Okay, Wonka's Vision asks, according to Randy Kramer, Mars is populated by an insectoid species with a hive mind consciousness. And he says, and let me just go to his previous thing. Basically says, have you listened to Randy Kramer's testimony with Project Camelot and his claim of being a soldier based on Mars fighting insectoid beings? And do you have an opinion about his testimony?
Yes, I think you've identified it very well to say that in the public eye, there's sort of three waves of whistleblowers. And Michael Relf and Randy Kramer is among the first wave, and Andrew Basiago and others. And I would like to add that part of what was going on with me in my recruitment was that I was very strongly also a communicator. I have over 50 different types of communications, all kinds of different beings. And what happened was, apparently because I got out of the program, somewhere along the line, I had an implant that it broke when I was 45 years of age. I'm now 57. So about 12 years ago, I had this experience with this. I was having a mind storm of my experiences contradicting the information that I was getting. And it was a crisis. And then there was this moment when there was this piezoelectric ping that literally went off inside my head. It was an audible. It was not a, mental a projection of a sound. It was an audible sound. It felt like it echoed around in there. I was disoriented for a while, and then it was like a switch went on, and I started to, with much clarity, communicate. I don't always front with that because I don't want to go and be a channeler or something like all that, but I do value that experience. As a result, I've been in contact with a lot of different types of beings, and my impression right now is that I think this white hat, black hat, service to self, service to others dichotomy is present in quite a few species. I don't think it's correct. First of all, the word "they" is completely useful. What do they want? What are they saying? Well, who are you talking to? That's a lot of different species that has even been identified by the government in over 50 that they were willing to admit to through whistleblower testimony. I think it's a lot more. But I actually do believe that there are species of white hat nature, of what you call Anunnaki, reptilian, and insectoids. Some people have had positive experiences with that. And of course, there is the black hat faction as well. So I want to say that because one of my contact experiences was with an insectoid being on a ship. And I made contact primarily with him because of my caregiving ability. That energy signature was attractive. And believe me, if you're a telepathic entity or empathic entity, you certainly don't want to chit chat with some of the dark souls that are out there. It's kind of icky. So they seek out and contact people who, are trying to do the right thing. And that's attractive. And also, I was brought along the path of training to understand what my contact was about. So in this insectoid hive mind being was saying a couple of things, that there's many different kinds of species on the back of the moon. There's the base underground on the back of the moon, underground at Mars, all over the solar system. We see evidences of that in anomaly imagery. And it's a wide variety of species with a wide variety of motivations and intentions. And that if we want to make the choice collectively to do the right thing and take care of everybody, no matter what, and the planet, we're going to have help rushing toward us. If we continue to be taken in by those with scarcity mindedness, which literally, when you kind of like boil it down, what does our economy produce? Our economy, our planetary economy, makes people a resource. Looking at the human trafficking question alone, you realize that humans are being sold to extraterrestrial entities, taken off planet, and sold to people of means here who utilize them. Once we have a basic income or an agreement to take care of everyone, giving them the choice, do I want to participate in any particular thing or not, will be the beginning of the end of human beings being a resource. So that's something to consider. And also, it's a signal. I've heard you talk about the Kardashev scale of civilizations that I don't know if we're a type 0. I definitely know we're type 1. We might be -1. But in terms of the sophistication and spiritual and technological growth of people on planet Earth right now is trying to decide if we're going to rise to the 0 point and begin to be species worth protecting and helping. Up until that, it's I don't know where we're going with that. Some days, Bret and I talk about every third day syndrome in this work. Every third day, we're very mopey and we're saying, "Oh heck, let it all burn," and nobody's listening. And then 2 days later, we're positive and on the job. So I think that resonates with a lot of light workers that I've talked to.
Yeah. Now, I just wanted to check in with you. The webinar so far has been going for an hour and 15 minutes. So to reach the 2-hour mark, we still have 45 minutes. Are you okay with that? Do you have
Oh
that?
yeah, I've done a lot of radio at about 2-hour mark, so I'm good to go.
Okay, good. Here are some other questions. What is the current population of Mars ratio to humans, reptilians, and insectoids, etc.?
I don't have that.
Intelligent reptilians, humans, and insectoids. Yeah, my understanding, the last time I checked in with this, is that if you take the data from the U.S. Mars force that was deployed at the poles, and the CIA Mars Jumper program was mainly deployed at the equator, but those were in the early days between the mid 60s and the 1980s. And then you had the Mars Colony Corporation, which began to bring in a kind of a survivalist, because they thought that they were on the catastrophic timeline, because Andy Basiago had reported that he had done as a US chrononaut time traveler, had done a one-time chronovisor probe from the year 1971 to the year June 2013, and had found the US Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. under 100 feet of brackish water. So that indicated some kind of a global coastal event sometime around the 2012 to 2013 area, or even beyond, because we were talking about that sometime after 2005, when my book Exopolitics, that Andy had witnessed back in 1971 when CIA and DARPA time traveled my book Exopolitics back to then, which Andy edited, and then he witnessed it in the presence of other witnesses, his CIA handler, father, and other colleagues. Now, but lately there's been some talk, because everybody's saying, oh, Nibiru's out there. We're seeing Nibiru. We're seeing the second sun. We're seeing that, this, that, and the other fragments. We'll be doing a program about this week on our program, News Evolution at TrueTube.co with Patty Greer and Laura Eisenhower on ascension and all of these issues. At that time, there was sort of an invasion. It looked like there was an invasion at the 3D level of kind of a gray reptilian force that had occupied Mars, and the humans there, according to some information, there was a population underground of about 1 million humans. The poles were in the hands of the insectoids, and there were reptilians on the surface, some of whom were 45 feet tall. The US Armed Forces and other things had various deployments there, and had made a strategic alliance with the humans to make a defense perimeter at Mars against the incursion into Mars and Earth orbit of the reptilian invasion. Is this something that sounds familiar to you?
Boy, there's a lot there. what's kind of coming to my mind right now is we've got, I don't have no numbers estimate, nor do I have information about specific engagements militarily. What I have more of a sense of is the idea that, humanity, sometimes it's hard for me to talk about who are we, because that's an interesting question by itself. So my sense is, from my contact base, is that we're talking about humanity in many different facets, interacting with other races, many different facets. So if you want to make the choice, because this is a lot about choice and how to look at something, and I totally would uphold anyone's testimony of any kind of negative experience too, even though I'm choosing to look at positive aspects. If someone is telling me, and I've interviewed experiencers for 5 years on radio as well as in person, and I've heard it, all over the spectrum. The important thing here is I uphold any experiencer's testimony, negative or positive. I think that's one thing we need to start doing, is to let people just tell their story, however it comes out. And so my feeling though is that when we talk about humanity as a collective, we literally have to put qualifiers of Earth, surface, human, mainstream, I guess, humans. There are underground facilities where humans interact. There are underground facilities where various ET factions interact. This is a lot busier of a cosmos and solar system than we know. And so it's important to know if there's a particular skirmish, and we somehow hear about it, even in the alternative community. We need to realize, just like small skirmishes are blown to all kinds of proportions to promote military spending in our country, false flag operations and whatnot, and screaming it on the nightly news that we need to think that something's particularly important. We need to step back and say, what does this mean in the context of going for a more positive outcome? And it's important to realize that stories bubble up into uphold something that Bret, who was he's a war veteran, or not war veteran, he's a veteran, and he's a hero. He pulled 4 guys out of a tent that blew up, a propane heater blow up, and he was a medic, pulled them out of the tent, attended to their wounds, and then subsequently, like many people I know, treated like crap in the military, and denied his benefits as part of shutting him up about other aspects of his experience. And he came up with a term I really like. It's called military insecurity. So not military security, insecurity. So we're at the point where those that want to continue a militaristic mindset have to be scrutinized as to what's their motivation. Are they self-perpetuating a militaristic mindset that might not be necessary? I think the question absolutely deserves to be asked. So when we hear skirmish type stories, we need to put that questioning as part of it as well. There's also considerable indication of cooperative operations between neutral to beneficial races helping us along. I think the story, and this may get me, I might get interference, because every time I say this guy's name, stuff happens. William Tompkins' testimony about working for TRW when during the Apollo missions, and they had a different video feed than was the NASA was showing to the public. And basically, that video feed showed that at the very moment we were putting a man on the moon and one small step and all that, there were huge space shuttle, and he drew a picture of them, space shuttle like ships he believed or knew were reptilian, that were perched along the edge of the nearby crater and were watching. So there's other indications in testimony that when, particularly, let's say Apollo 13, because we know they got in trouble, but the entire way back to the Earth, they were shadowed by a UFO, and I have some indication from my contact base that the UFO's energy field was cloaked around that craft. There was, I forgot who the guy was, but he said that there was some talk that if the craft disintegrated further, that they were going to simulate the safe return of the astronauts, because failure wasn't an option at that time. So the integration of our secret space program and even our overt programs with benevolent races, or perhaps neutral, as well as something, Alfred, that it was intriguing to me. It came out in discussions between you and Andy and Bernard Mendez, who mentioned the slots, the interstitial space environments, the quantum environments. I was getting the same information from A.R. Borden about what they called onto-energetic spaces. So when they used the program he was in was clandestine, they were using rogue physicists who were investigating an alternative to the working particle model, Newtonian Einstein model we have now. And we're looking at the quantum hologram theory, and they literally were using nocive people and people who could do something called ENS, and I will be talking about this in my talk, extension neurosensing, which is actually putting your point of view into an environment, something that got kind of simplified by Ingo Swann, who developed remote viewing for the military. But he and others could literally put a part of their consciousness in an environment and be fully immersed. And I think it was their consciousness was energetically put into another part of the quantum hologram. So there's a lot going on, and not all of it's space. Some of it is interdimensionally. And I think that the interdimensional, I feel I could talk about this now, is that I had quite a bit of downloading about interdimensional travel. So not all species or spacefaring, or what do you want to call it, adventurers go in a spaceship. They go in a interspatial doorway system, of which the jump room program was our use of it, our investigation of it. But I think that it is far older. My information has it as old as we can know mankind was around. This interdimensional doorway system existed. It was the primary way species were going from place to place, or time to time, or timeline to timeline, or however you want to call it. And the story that I was given was there was an invasion scenario. So it's complicated. It's very complicated.
Right. There are various questions about factions on Mars. What are the basic alliances that the Earth nations have? Are the Russians and Americans together, working together on Mars? Or are the splits? Is it the Illuminati, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Cheney, Bush faction? Clinton faction is like, all the pre-identified presidents are like on one side, and they're kind of, and Trump hasn't really declared his hand, because either they're keeping him in the dark about the fact that there's a huge US presence on Mars, or he is maintaining official silence about that. What do you think about Trump? Do you think Trump has been briefed about the Life on Mars program with the Space Force, or do you think that the generals are just brainwashing him into doing a weapons in space program for budget reasons?
Good question. Well, I would say the baseline, it seems like a universal question to me. The baseline universal question is, well, I'll tell it to you this way. My family used to play power Monopoly. So we'd play really fast, the game of Monopoly, which is, of course, teaching us about our market system. And obviously we have the 1% kind of winning the game, then it's not fun anymore. But in this game of Monopoly, we decided to play a situation where we could help each other. We put the pile of money in the middle, and instead of winner take all, we gave it to the guy who had the least amount of money. And that game went on for a really long time because we were able to sustain play by changing our attitudes toward each other in the goal of the game. So I feel like if this were a game, a big holographic, spiritual, physical game, it's between two ideas, which esoterically come into service to self or service to others. What if? So the creator question is, what if? What if we were selfish? What if we had a conspiracy? What if we used people, et cetera, et cetera? And on the other side is, what if we helped each other? So that's a kind of the basic breakdown of all of this. It gets murkier because as we get more 3D, regular free-range humans, right? We have some sense that we can decide, although there's an awful lot of influence towards trauma-based mind control making a negative outcome or negative attitude. But there's a lot of people not giving into that. So I think that question is not a human question. I think it's a galaxy question, for a universal question. I'm not sure. So I think that's what happens factionally. One contact that I had. So when I first opened the door to having contact, I'm Native American Irish. So I kept plugging into my ancestral beings first. That was very comforting to me because I had that, my life circumstances were a bit stark. I was in the situation discussed in the basic income movement of the precariat. So I was living, having a hard time getting work, middle-aged, female, former caregiver, dumped into this market. It wasn't going well for me. So that was comfort to me. But I also, as I reached further and further back into my ancestral line, I found an alien identified to me as an Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki, the first thing he said was, and I was like, okay, you're not somebody I really want to talk to. Can you please give me a really nice Pleiadian instead? But no, that's what happened. And the first thing was indicated to me was that his own race was factional. And he explained that their viewpoint of us at one point was that we're just a resource. We're just something to be used for their own end. But at a certain point, or certain ones began to see in humanity the spark of the divine. And I love that because that's the ghost in the machine of the sort of mandroids that we are. And so we're programmable. Trauma-based mind control is another part of my story. And we can be programmed to do all these things that somebody wants us to do, but we can also reprogram ourselves. And so I think that's a universal question. So I hear stories, I talk to experiencers of people who have had positive experience of beings that are touted as negative and vice versa. So there's a bigger game at play, but I think it's very spiritual in so many ways.
Right. Now, what do we know about the Martian human technology? I know that we've heard some reports about, the liaisons between the Martian human underground and the CIA, whereby the Martians would get here in rocket ships. This is back in the 1960s and 1970s, and would land at military air bases in New Jersey. This is from the report of U.S. time traveler and, excuse me, Mars explorer Andy Basiago. Do you have any reports on the state of the technology of the Martian human civilization that is sort of our genetic cousins? That is, we had an active interplanetary society up until the about 12,500 years ago in 9500 BC, there was an apparent war or interplanetary event, solar system catastrophe. There have also been a reported nuclear war on Mars between the reptilians and the humans, particularly the Pleiadians. And that's what made Mars, it used to be a verdant planet like Earth, down to being a sort of an obloid pumpkin planet with little surface vegetation and a thinned atmosphere. Do you have any background in all of those things?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of catastrophes that we think are just some, God playing billiard balls with the planets in the solar system, could be also, and indications are in ancient historical texts, were results of war. The Vimana, the stories in India from the Vimanas, that there was a war in heaven. That's something, by the way, Louis Michael Reinhardt, that's the title of his talk, by the way, is War in Heaven. So I'll be eager to hear what he has to say. So yeah, I think that that's entirely possible. So I think that, yeah, the indications I had of his story is, of course, if there's a technology that develops, it gets weaponized in about 5 minutes from, negative-minded people want to weaponize something, and use it against somebody. So, everything like our food supply could be considered weaponized. We consider the amount of toxins that's in it. Things being used against us, and I think against an ascension process, a higher consciousness that we'll go, a level we could go to, is being affected by silent war, right? So that is that aspect. I think, though, that at the same time, flipping those technologies around, or the implications of them, I think probably humanity has a chunk of it in space already. Maybe like a Star Trek scenario might be pretty accurate with the replication devices, etc. I think we surface human slave population here on the planet don't have access to that yet, but I'd like to think we eventually will. We seem to be along the trajectory of being technologically elevated. I think our telecommunications has been able to go where look what we're doing today, right? We're in different parts of the world and having a live conversation and people watching. To me, that's very amazing that that's happening. And I think it wouldn't take too many more additives of frequency where I could walk through that door behind me and go visit you in person and we have a cup of tea. So I think anything's possible. The jump from technology alone is, the implications of it are very, very significant towards a higher technological potential of society, including my mother and my daughter live in Washington State. I went out there in March, and it was quite the journey to get there from where I'm at. And for people to come here to Silver City, I'd love to step through a doorway and go see them a little more often. That would be lovely. And technology, teleportation, by the way, that word was invented by Charles Fort back in the 1800s, teleportation. So these ideas have been talked about in fictional accounts, and he sure had a lot of weird stories he used to tell. We're continuing his tradition of revealing weird stories. It's fun. I'm having a good time.
Yeah, there's people in the chat who are bringing up a very interesting phenomenon that was commented upon by a recent guest on this webinar series, Dr. Richard Allen Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And what he stated was that his finding is that people who undergo deep hypnosis have memories for working for the US government on Mars. Now, that sounds like a lot like your case. Could you comment on what he seems to find it as a widespread phenomenon?
Yes.
uh, because he's in the field that does he does deep hypnosis, and people who do deep hypnosis suddenly have this large population of people who have worked for the US government on Mars. Could you comment fully on all of that?
Well, I can talk at least to my own memory and what seems to be indicated to me by all these people who've seen me before. I have half a mind to go get a lab coat and wear it at the conference and see what kind of memories that stirs for people. My memories, or the memories of Dr. Rose, it's a little hard to tell who's who right there, is ground crew. So someone who was working, what I really appreciated about having this revelation from Andy, and who I trust. He's everything I've ever researched of anything he's ever said to me feels and checks out, very real. As well as Bret, and Cheyenne is Bret's daughter. She's 21, she lives with us. And she was involved literally in the same programs that they said they discontinued these programs in California. And not only was she in those programs, but she was also in the continuation of the twins program because she has a twin. So this continued, there's been continued to recruit people. I feel like my experience that's coming out as memories, that's coming out as dreams and flashes of visions, seems to be an Earthsider support crew type of thing involved in the massive amount of computing, database information that's online somewhere that has the history of this whole galactic prehistory and current. You know, it's not ancient aliens, there's aliens right now, come on. We've never been alone, we just think we are. If you're stuck in a certain mindset, you would think that we are, but we're not. One thing that happens if we have anything that looks like disclosure, and I wrote a little short book called Weird Should It Starve, which is, to me, the basic income is to get rid of the threat of financial assassination should somebody come forward with what they know. It's the beginning of a huge revelation of what's going on. But I think once we kind of know what's going on, yeah, this has been going on forever. A good chunk of our populations have memories of living on Mars, not as participants in a program, but literally as inhabitants or visitors. I was able to transcribe or edit the transcription of the regression therapy that was done on Ken Johnston, and he has the whole memory of being on the surface of Mars way back, possibly a memory stream from either having been a genetic descendant of Anunnaki, of the Ejecting specifically. I'm going to say something hardly anybody even asks me about, and that is we have DNA memory, we have DNA ability. So all these psychic abilities is part of the human genome. It's not something particularly paranormal. We call it that, but it's in the range of normal, especially if you look at the tribal traditions of the Druids in one side of my family and the shaman from the other side of my family. But also, there was this story about the Ejecting back in the Sumerian texts, which were a bunch of people who drove the ships for the royals, jotting around the solar system, and they got tired of it and wanted to settle down and marry and have kids, and they basically abducted a bunch of human women here on Earth and said, "You're going to let us have our families, but we're not going to continue to work for you, bosses." And so now we have Ejecting DNA in the human genome, star navigator DNA. And when you start to hear about what the Montauk chair experiment was about, where they put people in a chair that piloted a UFO, is one of the stories. It is a technology where someone who has precognitive ability is able to merge with their ship and able to direct it. And that was the propulsion. They took a neutrally buoyant ship, and they were able, with this mind, body, soul connection with the ship, able to pilot. And they had just enough precognition to swerve around things that would destroy the ship. We have that DNA in us. And people having a lot of flying dreams might want to consider that they might actually be having memories of having those experiences of either being in craft or the soul technology of traveling in a localized bubble of energy called a Merkaba. So there's a lot more to us. And to me, that's like the most important thing. Finding out, who are we in relation to all of this? This is the big question. Because once we be able to figure that out, a lot of the rest of the universe will make a lot more sense.
Yeah. So what are the conditions that are needed for a lot of the self-discovery to happen? I know that in our original publication of Exopolitics, the book that Project Pegasus, DARPA CIA time travel back from 2005 back to 1971. And I actually met with 50 or so project people from Project Pegasus back in 1971, although I thought I was addressing a group on environmental protection. They set it up so they could do time travel surveillance on me. Now, so what is needed? I mean, one of our guests said, look, the people in roles of authority now all have reptilian souls, because this is a system that has grown up over the last 12,000, 18,000 years. And the reptilian soul people see that there's some human bodies that have, the majority of the human bodies have human souls, and some have reptilian souls. And it's those reptilian souls, it's a category of the Anunnaki reptilian, with probably some Draco, depending on which role of authority. And they just have, they think they have the planet Earth lined up, and they set up a pedo planet so that the role of humans is to produce loosh and body parts and slave labor. So how do we get beyond that? This fellow's suggestion, which I thought was very good, was to begin to eject and eliminate people with reptilian souls from authority roles on the planet. I mean, once we name our predator and we're aware that, oh, all POTUSes have had reptilian souls, including, according to this fellow, the present one, although he's not a Draco or, you know, a negative reptilian in that sort. Over to you. What do you think about that? We need humans who are in roles of authority, people with human souls in roles of authority that have more empathy, are more into unity consciousness, which is we are one, rather than reptilians that are territorial and they're into I win, you lose. What do you think about all that?
Oh, that's a great question. One of my contact experiences, and when you're having a telepathic contact, it tends to come in the words that you would use, and it can be kind of funny because it's more of an energy signature versus an actual human English word for me. Although I'm able to translate some of that into my journaling, I'm getting better at it, and eventually we'll publish that. But one contact I had said, "Why are the babies in charge?" What a question. What I discerned thinking about that was, why are the immature souls, baby souls, immature, haven't learned, haven't been through enough experiences to understand, you know, and I love babies. I had 3 of them of my own, took care of them, took care of a lot of kids. And kids, babies are really cute, and it's a good thing they're cute because they are the most selfish beings on the planet, because it's, I want this now. And we do that. We take care of them until they grow enough to understand that they need to be part of their family, to interact and to not just receive, but to give also. So that question is very interesting to me, because our current president has been characterized as a big baby with a diaper as part of satire, but it's the king baby concept. It's the idea that for some reason we seem to have in leadership people who are ill-tempered, impatient, ruthless, selfish, service to self, and are willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want. To me, and also feel like that they can control us, they can control all of nature. I mean, when you look at the energy signature of somebody like that, you see a very immature kind of being. And I think we have had probably interference, I would say, to have this kind of leadership positions available in the first place. So we live, and one of the things I'll be doing as coursework going into next year is called Overcoming the Hierarch Mind. And it's about our built-in negative permanent hierarchy, which to me energetically looks like a pyramid. It looks like a fractal pyramid. So I actually show that model as part of my talk. So it's a pyramid made of smaller pyramids, smaller pyramids, and each one of those little pyramids are our sub-organizations that are also a hierarchy. So our oppressive religions, or our political parties, or our mobs and criminal elements are these smaller pyramids, all of which goes up to a pyramid on top, seen as the all-seeing eye, imagery on the back of our dollar, how convenient, is the pyramidion. The top of the pyramid is called the pyramidion. The pyramid technology focuses all the energy from the bottom all the way up to the middle to the top as like a foci, like you'd have on a parabolic dish. To feed Loosh, like you said, Loosh is ego boo. It's energy. It's when we pay attention, we literally give a margin of energy to whatever it is we're paying attention to, and it's centripetal energy. And so they've arranged it so they can suck up all the air in the room and be self-important. And I think part of maturity of humanity is to go, wait a minute, that's first of all, not have those positions of that much authority in the first place. Be autonomous, make our own decisions. Do we have to have someone else make really basic decisions for us? Okay. And then secondly, make sure if we ourselves had reached a greater maturity, which eventually becomes service to others, we would instantly see anyone who did not have that same orientation. We'd instantly know that person, in my opinion, is mentally ill. That's a mental illness to think you're, the only important person in your realm of influence. My religion, unfortunately, was hierarchical. It's by those of us who have left it considered a cult. And one of the things that they fostered was psychopaths and sociopathic behaviors with interfamily and interfaith. And it was a kind of a nightmare. That was part of what I also had to go through. And now that I see that, it's really easy for me to listen to somebody and see that this person has that bent. Well, we don't need to have that structure of organization at all, if ever. But we certainly are outgrowing that, because with the technologies that are available, we could become far more autonomous, both in self-governance, which is always the first step, and then any other governance that we ask to do things. And I did get a joke. One time I was writing, doing my automatic writing, and the joke went like this. Our astronaut landed on a faraway planet. He gets out of his spaceship. He goes up to two locals there on the planet working in the field, and he says, I am from Earth. I come from peace. Take me to your leader. And one alien says to the other alien, well, of course, we were the aliens, right? And that's my, he goes, do you want to be the leader today? And the other one says, oh, I was last time. You go ahead, which I thought was hysterical. In other words, there's ways of living that don't require all this hierarchy and governance over people who were sovereign integrals. We're a whole of everything, a fractal of everything, a part of everything. but we're also whole beings capable of self-autonomy. We were made that way. That is our genetic heritage. That's what we can tap into. When you ask me, how do we tap into it? Is believe it's possible. Meditation and disconnecting from the consensus reality show, listening to people in the fringe and on the margins that might just have something to say, and let them have their say. Don't jump in there and, if you hear something that does not jive yet with your own belief systems, don't jump all over them. Just let them say what they have to say. So it's empathy is probably the biggest thing. Empathy and respect are two prerequisites to changing personal and planetary, and gratitude, thankfulness, and appreciation. Those are all the gateways to higher consciousness.
Well, thank you for that very in-depth insights. We're just at about the 2-hour mark now, so we're just going to take this final question. Oh, gee, there's a couple of good ones. One is, are there anything in the Vedas or in the other sacred texts, the Testaments, Old and New Testaments, etc., about Mars? That's one question. And then the follow-up, are there any other credible witnesses about Mars other than Andy? And it's now, I think, that you can talk about all of the other amazing, including NASA Mars astronaut that's going to be at the 7th annual Mars Anomaly Research Society meeting in Silver City, New Mexico, September 7th to 9th. So, of course, we have NASA astronauts that have been on Mars. So could you answer those two questions? Because we're now at the 2-hour mark, and then you can tell everyone how to get to Silver City and why they should be there.
Silver City is really fun as a city. It was established in the 1800s, and they made a rule to build adobe or brick or stone. So we're still here, as opposed to Western towns that were built of wood and are ghost towns all dotted around New Mexico. So it's a great community. It's a frontier community. It's a bit isolated, but it's a vibrant community and open-minded. I love it. And another thing about New Mexico in general is that culturally, we have all these weird stories here. So we have Roswell. We have lots of people who worked for JPL and Sandia Labs and stuff retired here. So off the record conversations are really off the hook here, I've got to tell you. You were talking about astronaut, Ken Johnston, who was an astronaut candidate in the Apollo. I was his editor of both of his books, and Bret did anomaly work on his images. He had a whole collection of original images from the NASA era. Will not be able to be here. He has a scheduling conflict. I would direct people to kenjohnstonmedia.net for more information about that. And Bret's website, Bret Colin at bretcolin.com. My website is caseypatrick.com, and Bret and I have a collective website called portalsofknowing.com. And Portals of Knowing is what I want to end with. It has to do with knowing, being a nocive. The universe is at our fingertips or the tips of our minds. We've got to find out who we are or what we're capable of. Most of the stuff that I've talked about was people inquiring within themselves and allowing themselves to flesh out the things that they were discovering about themselves, their memories, their experiences, and then sharing with other people, which is probably the biggest thing going on in all of this, is that we're able to talk to each other right now on forums, online, and at conferences, is where all that kind of stuff happens. And that's why you should be there. You're going to hear the stories that aren't quite even in the farthest fringy edges of, the paranormal genre, I suppose you'd say, or exopolitical genre. So, be there is to probably have some questions answered. And the one thing that I assume of almost everyone interested in this genre is you are an experiencer. You're either having a dream, a memory, or a feeling, or an experience that is drawing you towards this information. And the big mistake researchers can make is that we're drawn to it because it's just kind of cool. I think it's a mistake. I think humanity's waking up together to so many things. But the journey starts within. Is learning what your intuition is. It's intuit, eyes shine, intuition, right? Imagination, image in, eyes shine. Imagination is the opposable thumb of the mind. Without it, you can't grasp anything, right? That's one of my little sayings. And a lot of this information has been dismissed personally and by others. Oh, that's just your imagination, which is kind of horrible because I like my thumbs. So there you go. But I think this is going to be an amazing event in so many ways, and I get to show off my cool Western town, and we're going to eat chili and cornbread. So it's fun. And I hope people come, MarsAnomalyConference.com. You'll be amazed and probably even validated and know what to do next, I do believe.
Great. Well, I really want to thank you. We're now at the 2 hours and 1 minute mark. And that kind of brings us to this opening. And so I really want to thank you for taking time out, Karen, to come and share this with us today, and for all the hard work and dedication that you members of the U.S. Mars exploration team who have decided to come forward and speak publicly about this, because this is part of the two planets coming back together, which they've been artificially separated for some time, just for power reasons of elites. I would say elites and interspecies strife, but no good reason. In fact, no good reason at all for as far as we, the human community, is concerned. So we look forward to your joining us again in the future, perhaps a report on the other side of the conference. And that said, people wanting to know more about it, go to MarsAnomalyConference.com. And thank you so much. Is there anything that you had wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say during the webinar?
No, I just want to thank you for encouraging me with your book, Exopolitics. It was also another catalyst for me doing this. My mom has my copy, and right now in her collection, and I keep losing that book. It keeps getting passed around. It's a great book. But yeah, the Exopolitics is been an important part of my awakening, and I appreciate all the work that you've done bringing people into people's awareness. I really appreciate all the media work done, and I've often been convinced you've got a clone somewhere, Alfred, because you do so much. You do so much.
It's the 5-planet Gemini that keeps it going. And soon we're going to be out with a new book called Universe, Multiverse, Omniverse, with a special chapter on Mars.
Good.
And we'll be sending you a review copy of that. So
you
go to town. Okay, well,
cool.
Thank you so much. And we'll be talking soon, and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Okay.